Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The overhead lights at JFK International Airport flickered with that sterile, institutional glow that made everything look slightly unreal. Madison Torres stood at baggage claim carousel number 7, her eyes tracking the endless parade of black suitcases, circling like some kind of monotonous parade. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, her feet aching in the new heels she'd bought specifically for this trip, and all she wanted was to grab her bag and collapse into the back of a taxi. Her phone buzzed for the 3rd time, her mother, no doubt, wondering if she'd landed safely. Madison silenced it without looking, her attention fixed on the conveyor belt. There. Finally. A sleek black roller bag with a silver lock and a leather tag swung past. She lunged forward, nearly tripping over someone's oversized duffel, and yanked it off the belt with more force than necessary. Thank God. She could already taste the mediocre airport coffee she'd grab on her way out. Dragging the suitcase behind her, Madison wove through the crowd of exhausted travelers, crying babies and reunion hugs that made her chest tighten with something she didn't want to name. She'd come to New York for a job interview, her big break after 3 years of scraping by as a freelance graphic designer in Chicago. This was supposed to be her fresh start. No distractions, no drama, just her and her portfolio, and a chance to prove she was more than small-town potential. The automatic doors slid open, and the humid August air hit her like a wall. She fumbled for her phone to call an Uber, when the suitcase, which had been rolling smoothly behind her, suddenly caught on something and jerked to a stop. Madison tugged. Nothing. She tugged harder, turning to see what the problem was. That's when she noticed the tag. It wasn't hers. The leather tag, which she'd assumed was the generic one she'd bought at Target, was actually embossed with gold lettering. Initials. Dr. Madison's stomach dropped. Oh no. No, no, no. She crouched down, her hands shaking as she flipped the tag over. Dominic Russo. Her suitcase had a bright pink ribbon tied to the handle. This one had nothing. How had she not noticed? She stood abruptly, scanning the crowd for anyone who looked like they might be missing a bag. But everyone was moving with purpose, too absorbed in their own chaos to care about hers. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Mom, I'm fine. I just landed." "No, I haven't called a car yet." "Mom, I have to go." She hung up and stared at the suitcase like it might explode. What was she supposed to do? Go back inside? Find lost and found? She glanced at her watch. Her interview was in less than 12 hours, and she still needed to check into her hotel, shower, and run through her presentation at least twice. She didn't have time for this. Madison bit her lip, gripped the handle of the wrong suitcase, and made a decision. She'd take it to the hotel, call the airline, and sort it out in the morning. Whoever Dominic Russo was, he'd probably already realized the mistake and filed a claim. It would be fine. Everything would be fine. The Uber driver barely glanced at her as she climbed into the back seat, the mysterious suitcase wedged beside her. She gave him the address of her hotel, a modest place in Midtown she'd booked because it was cheap and close to the company where she'd be interviewing. As the car pulled away from the curb, Madison leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. She didn't notice the black SUV that had been idling near the terminal. Didn't see it pull into traffic 3 cars behind them. At the hotel, Madison checked in with minimal fuss, declined the desk clerk's offer to help with her luggage, and dragged both her purse and the suitcase into the elevator. Her room was on the 8th floor, small and plain, with a view of a brick wall and a bed that looked like it had seen better decades. She dropped her purse on the chair and lifted the suitcase onto the bed. For a moment, she just stared at it. She shouldn't open it. That would be wrong, an invasion of privacy. But what if there was something inside that could help her find this Dominic Russo, A business card, maybe, or a phone number. She chewed her thumbnail, a nervous habit she'd never been able to break, and slowly unzipped the bag. The first thing she saw was clothes. Expensive clothes. A charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her rent. Crisp white dress shirts, still in dry cleaning plastic. Silk ties in deep blues and blacks. Whoever this man was, he had money. Madison pushed the clothes aside, her curiosity getting the better of her rational brain. Beneath the suits, she found a leather portfolio. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over it. This was definitely crossing a line. But she'd already come this far. She flipped it open. Inside were documents, contracts by the look of them, all printed on heavy paper with official-looking seals. She scanned the first page, her eyes catching on words like acquisition and offshore accounts and liquidation. Her heart started to beat faster. At the bottom of the page was a signature. Dominic Russo. And beneath that, in smaller print, a title. Chief Executive Officer, Russo Enterprises. Madison's hands trembled as she set the portfolio down. Russo Enterprises. She'd heard that name before. Where had she heard it? She pulled out her phone and typed the name into the search bar. The results loaded, and her breath caught. Russo Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with interests in real estate, shipping, and, according to one particularly ominous article, alleged ties to organized crime. The article was 3 years old, published by an investigative journalist who'd later retracted the story after what was described as pressure from Russo's legal team. Madison's mouth went dry. Mafia. She'd grabbed the suitcase of a man who might be in the Mafia. Her first instinct was to laugh because this couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. But the evidence was right in front of her, neatly folded in Italian wool and printed on expensive paper. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up, pacing the cramped hotel room. Okay. She just needed to return it. She'd call the airline first thing in the morning, explain the situation, and get her own bag back. Simple. Easy. Nothing to panic about. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Madison froze, her eyes darting to the suitcase, then to the door. Who would be knocking? She hadn't ordered room service, hadn't told anyone where she was staying except her mother, and her mother wasn't the type to show up unannounced. The knock came again, harder this time. Firmer. Miss Torres. The voice was male, deep and calm in a way that made her skin prickle. We need to talk. Madison's heart slammed against her ribs. How did they know her name? How did they know she was here? She looked around the room, as if there might be some escape route she'd missed, but there was only the window, and she was 8 floors up. Miss Torres, the voice continued, still calm, still polite. We know you have something that doesn't belong to you. Open the door. Her hands shook as she backed away from the door, her mind racing. She could call the police. She should call the police. But what would she say? She'd taken the suitcase. She'd opened it. She'd looked through someone's private documents. Would they even believe her? I'll count to 3, the voice said. 1. Madison grabbed her phone. 2. She stared at the door, her pulse roaring in her ears. 3. The lock clicked. Madison's breath stopped. She hadn't unlocked it. The door swung open slowly, deliberately, and 2 men stepped inside. They were both tall, both wearing dark suits that fit too well to be anything but custom. The first man had salt and pepper hair and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. The second was younger, broader, with cold blue eyes that scanned the room like he was cataloging every detail. And then, behind them, a third man entered. He was taller than the others, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and his eyes, Jesus, His eyes were the kind of dark brown that looked black in certain light. They locked onto Madison, and she felt like she'd been pinned in place. "You must be Miss Torres," he said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. "I believe you have something of mine." Section 2. Madison's throat felt like sandpaper. She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a small, pathetic squeak that made her want to sink through the floor. The man, who could only be Dominic Russo, stepped further into the room, his movements measured and controlled. He glanced at the open suitcase on the bed, then back at her, one dark eyebrow rising slightly. "I can explain," Madison finally managed, her voice hoarse. "It was an accident. I grabbed the wrong bag at the airport. I didn't mean to take it. I was going to call the airline in the morning and stop talking." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through her rambling like a knife. Madison's mouth snapped shut. Dominic moved to the bed, his long fingers trailing over the open suitcase. He didn't seem angry, exactly. More curious, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. "You opened it." It wasn't a question. Madison swallowed hard. "I thought maybe there'd be contact information inside, so I could return it." His eyes flicked to the leather portfolio sitting on the nightstand, then back to her. "And did you find what you were looking for?" "I found your name," she said quickly, "and I looked you up online. I was trying to figure out how to get it back to you. That's all. I swear." Dominic picked up the portfolio, his expression unreadable. He flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately, as if checking to make sure everything was still there. The two men by the door hadn't moved. They stood like statues, their eyes never leaving her. "She's telling the truth," Dominic said finally. Though he wasn't talking to her, he was talking to the men. She's too scared to be lying. Madison wanted to protest, to say she wasn't scared, but that would have been a lie. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back to hide it. "So," Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I have my suitcase back now?" Dominic closed the portfolio and set it back in the suitcase with meticulous care. Then he zipped the bag shut, lifted it off the bed, and turned to face her. His expression was still calm, still controlled, but there was something in his eyes now, something that made her stomach twist. "Your suitcase," he said slowly, "is currently in my possession. And until I'm certain you haven't compromised the contents of mine, it's going to stay there." "What?" Madison's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You can't just keep my stuff. That's theft." One of the men by the door, the younger one with the cold blue eyes, let out a low chuckle. Dominic silenced him with a glance. "Miss Torres," Dominic said, his tone maddeningly patient. "You have stumbled into a situation that is far more complicated than a simple baggage mix-up. The documents in this suitcase are highly sensitive. If any of that information were to fall into the wrong hands, it could cause significant problems. For me, and for you." "I didn't read anything," Madison protested. "I barely looked at the first page. I don't even know what half of it means." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face, as if he could read the truth written there. Then he nodded slowly. "I believe you. But belief isn't the same as certainty." "So what are you saying?" Madison asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "That you're just going to keep my bag, hold it hostage?" "I'm saying," Dominic replied smoothly, "that you're going to stay where I can see you until I'm satisfied you're not a threat." Madison stared at him. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" No, he looked like the kind of man who didn't joke about anything. Madison's mind raced. She had an interview tomorrow morning, the most important interview of her life. If she didn't show up, if she missed this chance, she'd have nothing. She'd spent the last of her savings on this trip. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I have an interview tomorrow. It's important. I need to be there." Dominic's expression didn't change. Then you should have been more careful at baggage claim. Please, Madison said, and she hated how desperate she sounded. I didn't do anything wrong. This was just a mistake. A mistake, Dominic repeated. He stepped closer, and Madison instinctively backed up until her legs hit the edge of the chair. He loomed over her, tall and imposing, and she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her head spin. A mistake that put you in possession of documents worth millions of dollars. A mistake that could have gotten you killed if you'd taken that suitcase to the wrong person. So forgive me, Miss Torres, if I don't find your interview particularly compelling. Madison's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She felt trapped, cornered, like a rabbit staring down a wolf. What do you want from me? She whispered. Dominic tilted his head, considering her. For now, I want you to come with me. Where? Somewhere I can keep an eye on you. Madison shook her head again, more frantically this time. No, absolutely not. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do, Madison snapped, finding a spark of defiance beneath the fear. I'll scream. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you broke into my room and threatened me. Dominic's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Go ahead. Call them. Tell them you stole a suitcase full of confidential documents. See how that works out for you. Madison's hand, which had been inching toward her phone, froze. He was right. God, he was right. If she called the police, she'd have to explain why she'd taken the suitcase, why she'd opened it, why she'd been snooping through his things. And if those documents really were as sensitive as he claimed, she could be charged with something. Theft. Espionage. She didn't even know. Dominic must have seen the realization dawn on her face because his expression softened, just slightly. I'm not going to hurt you, Miss Torres. I just need to make sure you're not going to hurt me. And the best way to do that is to keep you close. How close? Madison asked, her voice trembling. Dominic stepped back, giving her space to breathe. Close enough. Now pack your things. We're leaving. Madison's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to stand. This is insane. Perhaps, Dominic said. But it's the situation we're in. He gestured to the two men by the door. Vincent, Marcus, give the lady some privacy to pack. The men nodded and stepped out into the hallway. Dominic followed them, pausing at the threshold to look back at her. You have 5 minutes, he said. And Miss Torres, don't do anything foolish. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Madison was alone. She stood there for a moment, her mind spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Then she lunged for her phone. Her hands shook as she pulled up her mother's contact, but before she could hit call, she stopped. What would she even say? That she'd been kidnapped by a maybe mobster because she'd grabbed the wrong suitcase? Her mother would have a heart attack. And besides, Dominic was right. If she called the police, she'd be in just as much trouble as he would. Maybe more. Madison's eyes darted to the window. She could try to run. She could scream for help. But 8 floors up, who would hear her? And even if she made it out of the hotel, where would she go? Dominic clearly had resources. He'd found her within hours of her taking his suitcase. He'd gotten into her locked hotel room without breaking a sweat. If she ran, he'd find her. And next time, he might not be so polite. Damn it. Madison shoved her phone into her purse and grabbed the few items she'd unpacked. Her toothbrush, her laptop, the blazer she'd been planning to wear tomorrow. She moved mechanically, her mind still trying to catch up with reality. This wasn't how her trip was supposed to go. She was supposed to be preparing for her interview, not packing to leave with a dangerous stranger. There was a knock on the door. Time's up, Dominic's voice called. Madison zipped her purse shut and took a deep breath. Then she opened the door. Dominic stood in the hallway, his suitcase in one hand, his phone in the other. Behind him, Vincent and Marcus waited like sentries. "Ready?" Dominic asked. Madison didn't answer. She just stepped into the hallway, her purse slung over her shoulder, and let the door swing shut behind her. As they walked toward the elevator, Madison tried to memorize every detail: the pattern of the carpet, the exit signs, the number of doors they passed. If she was going to get out of this, she needed to stay sharp. The elevator ride down was silent except for the soft hum of the machinery. Madison stood wedged between Vincent and Marcus, both of whom were tall enough to block her view of the doors. Dominic stood in front, his back to her, checking something on his phone. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into the lobby. The night desk clerk glanced up, saw the group, and immediately looked back down at his computer screen. Clearly, he'd been paid not to notice anything. Outside, a black SUV was waiting at the curb, its engine already running. Marcus opened the back door, and Dominic gestured for Madison to get in. She hesitated. Last chance, she thought. Last chance to scream, to run, to do something. But her feet carried her forward, and before she knew it, she was sliding into the leather seat. Dominic climbed in beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Vincent took the driver's seat, and Marcus sat in the passenger side. The doors locked with a heavy thunk. "Where are we going?" Madison asked, her voice small. Dominic didn't look at her. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the late-night traffic of Manhattan. Madison watched the lights blur past the window, her heart sinking with every block they drove. She didn't know where they were taking her, didn't know what Dominic Russo really wanted. All she knew was that her life had just taken a turn into territory she'd never imagined. And there was no going back. Section 3. The SUV glided through the streets of Manhattan with unsettling smoothness, as if the traffic lights had been programmed specifically for their route. Madison pressed herself against the door, trying to maintain as much distance as possible from Dominic, though the back seat wasn't nearly large enough for that to be effective. He sat perfectly still, his attention on his phone, occasionally typing something with quick, precise movements. She studied him from the corner of her eye. In the dim light of passing street lamps, his profile was sharp, almost severe, the kind of face that belonged on old Roman coins. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible, and she found herself wondering about the story behind it, before remembering that she shouldn't care about anything related to this man, except how to get away from him. They'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when the building started to change. The cramped midtown blocks gave way to wider streets, taller structures, the kind of architecture that screamed money. Old money. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. The SUV turned down a tree-lined street and pulled up in front of a building that looked more like a fortress than a residence. Gray stone, Art Deco details, a doorman who stood at attention, as if he'd been waiting specifically for them. "We're here," Dominic said, pocketing his phone. He opened his door before Vincent could come around to do it for him. Madison didn't move. "Where exactly is here?" "My home." "You expect me to stay in your house?" Dominic leaned back into the car, one arm resting on the doorframe. His dark eyes met hers, and there was something almost amused in them. Penthouse, technically. And yes, that's exactly what I expect, unless you'd prefer Vincent and Marcus to take you somewhere less comfortable. There are several warehouses along the waterfront that would serve the purpose. Madison's stomach turned. She couldn't tell if he was joking. The problem was, she suspected he wasn't. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse and climbing out of the SUV with as much dignity as she could muster. "But I want my suitcase back. In time." The doorman nodded at Dominic as they approached. "Good evening, Mr. Russo. Everything prepared?" "Yes, sir. The package you requested is already upstairs. Dominic nodded, not breaking stride. Package. Madison didn't like the sound of that. The lobby was all marble and brass, with a chandelier that probably cost more than her childhood home. Her footsteps echoed too loudly on the polished floor, making her feel even more out of place in her rumpled travel clothes and scuffed heels. They rode the elevator in silence. It was the kind of elevator that required a key to access certain floors, and Dominic's key took them all the way to the top. When the doors opened, they didn't open into a hallway. They opened directly into the penthouse. Madison stepped out and tried not to gape. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Manhattan skyline. The city spread before them like a galaxy of lights. The space was enormous, open concept, with furniture that managed to look both minimalist and impossibly expensive. Modern art hung on the walls, pieces she vaguely recognized from her design magazines, but could never afford to see in person. "Make yourself comfortable," Dominic said, setting his suitcase down by a sleek black console table. "Vincent, Marcus, you're dismissed for the night." The two men nodded and disappeared back into the elevator. Madison stood frozen in the middle of the room, clutching her purse like it was a life raft. She watched the elevator doors close, sealing her in with Dominic Russo, and felt her last chance at escape slip away. "Are you hungry?" Dominic asked, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a leather chair. "What?" "It's a simple question. Have you eaten?" Madison blinked. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. The airplane peanuts, maybe. Her stomach chose that moment to growl, betraying her. "I'll take that as a yes," Dominic said, moving toward what she assumed was the kitchen. He rolled up his sleeves as he walked, revealing forearms that were far more distracting than they had any right to be. "You don't have to cook for me," Madison said, finally finding her voice. "I'm your prisoner, not your dinner guest. You're not my prisoner." "Then I can leave?" Dominic paused, considering. "No." "So I'm your prisoner." Dominic opened the massive stainless steel refrigerator and pulled out ingredients with the efficiency of someone who actually knew his way around a kitchen. "You're my guest, who happens to have limited freedom of movement. That's literally the definition of a prisoner." He smiled, just slightly. "You're very argumentative for someone in your position." "It's a defense mechanism," Madison shot back. "Apparently, I develop it when I'm kidnapped. I didn't kidnap you. You forced me to come here against my will. That's kidnapping. I strongly encouraged you to come here for your own safety. There's a difference." Madison wanted to throw something at him, but everything in the penthouse looked too expensive to risk. Instead, she dropped her purse on the couch and crossed her arms. "What are you making?" "Pasta. Something simple. Unless you have dietary restrictions I should know about." "I'm lactose intolerant," Madison said, because some petty part of her wanted to make this difficult for him. Dominic didn't miss a beat. "Then I'll skip the Parmesan." He moved around the kitchen with surprising grace for such a large man, pulling out pots and pans, setting water to boil, chopping vegetables with a knife that looked sharp enough to be dangerous. Madison found herself watching, despite herself. This wasn't how she'd imagined mob bosses spent their evenings. Then again, maybe he wasn't actually a mob boss. Maybe those articles had been wrong. Maybe Russo Enterprises was completely legitimate, and she was panicking over nothing. "You're staring," Dominic said without looking up from the cutting board. "I'm trying to figure you out. Good luck with that. People have been trying for years. Are you really in the Mafia?" Dominic's hand paused mid-chop, just for a fraction of a second. Then he continued, the knife moving with precise, rhythmic strikes. "That's a very direct question. You're keeping me prisoner in your penthouse. I think I've earned direct questions." He scraped the chopped vegetables into a pan where olive oil was already shimmering. The smell of garlic filled the air, and despite everything, Madison's stomach growled again. "The Mafia," Dominic said slowly, is a very outdated term. It conjures images of men in fedoras, speaking in Italian, kissing rings. That's not how modern organized crime works. So you admit you're in organized crime. I admit that the line between legitimate business and organized crime is often thinner than people would like to believe. That's a politician's answer. Dominic turned to face her, leaning back against the counter. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. My family has been in business for 4 generations, he said. We own real estate, shipping companies, restaurants, construction firms. All legitimate enterprises, all profitable. But we also have enemies, competitors who would love nothing more than to see us fail. And those documents in my suitcase, the ones you so kindly retrieved for me, contain information about a merger that could shift the entire power structure of this city. If that information got out before the deal closed, it would be catastrophic. So when I say I need to keep you close, it's not because I enjoy holding young women against their will. It's because I can't afford to take chances. Madison absorbed this, her mind racing. So you think I might sell your secrets to your competitors? I think you're an unknown variable, Dominic said, and I don't like unknown variables. The water started to boil, and he turned back to add pasta to the pot. He stirred it with a wooden spoon, his movements casual, as if they were having a perfectly normal conversation. Madison moved closer, drawn by curiosity despite her better judgment. How do you know I won't just call someone the second you're not looking? Dominic glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. Because you're smarter than that. You've already figured out that going to the police would implicate you just as much as it would me. And you know that if you tried to sell information to my competitors, they'd either kill you to eliminate the witness or use you as bait to get to me. Either way, you'd end up dead. The casual way he said it made her blood run cold. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to be honest with you. There's a difference. He pulled 2 plates from a cabinet, expensive-looking things with a minimalist design. The pasta finished cooking, and he drained it, tossed it with the vegetables, and what looked like a homemade sauce he'd pulled from the fridge. Within minutes, he'd plated 2 perfect portions. Here, he said, handing her one. Eat. Madison took the plate automatically, then stood there, holding it like she wasn't sure what to do next. Dominic carried his own plate to the long dining table and sat down, gesturing to the chair across from him. She could refuse. She could dump the plate in the sink and storm off to whatever room he was planning to lock her in. But she was hungry, and the pasta smelled incredible, and some part of her brain that was still functioning on autopilot told her she needed to keep her strength up. So she sat. The first bite was better than she wanted to admit. The second was even better. Dominic watched her eat with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not smug, exactly. More satisfied, like he'd won a small victory. You're a good cook, Madison said, because the silence was getting uncomfortable. My mother insisted I learn, Dominic replied. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was a man who'd always be dependent on others. And she didn't raise dependent men. Where is she now? Dead. Madison's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it, the slight tightness around his eyes, told Madison it still hurt. She filed that information away, another piece of the puzzle that was Dominic Russo. They ate in silence for a few more minutes. Outside, the city glittered like scattered diamonds. Inside, the only sound was the soft clink of silverware against plates. This is surreal, Madison said finally. What is? This. She gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at him, at the situation. A few hours ago, I was at the airport getting ready to start my new life. Now I'm eating pasta with a man who may or may not be a crime lord. Life rarely goes according to plan. That's a depressing philosophy. Dominic shrugged. It's a realistic one. Madison pushed her empty plate away. So what happens now? Now, Dominic said, standing and collecting both. Plates. You get some rest. I'll show you to your room. My room, Madison repeated. As in, a guest room? As in, your room for the foreseeable future. Until I decide you're not a liability. And how long will that take? Dominic walked to the sink and rinsed the plates with the same efficiency he'd used to cook. That depends entirely on you. The room Dominic showed her to was easily twice the size of her entire apartment back in Chicago. A king-sized bed dominated the space, covered in what looked like Egyptian cotton sheets in a deep charcoal gray. More floor-to-ceiling windows offered another stunning view of the city, and there was a door that led to what she assumed was a private bathroom. Your suitcase should arrive tomorrow morning, Dominic said from the doorway. In the meantime, you'll find toiletries in the bathroom and clothes in the closet that should fit. Clothes, Madison repeated. You just happen to have women's clothes in your guest room? They're my sister's. She stays here sometimes when she's in the city. Madison turned to look at him. You have a sister? Dominic's expression shifted, just slightly. Something that might have been warmth, though it was hard to tell. Sophia. She's in Milan right now for Fashion Week. She's a designer? Of course she is, Madison muttered, because apparently everyone in Dominic's orbit lived in a completely different stratosphere from normal people. Is there anything else you need? A time machine, Madison said, so I can go back to the airport and not grab your stupid suitcase. Dominic's lips twitched. That's not currently available. Then I guess I'm good. He nodded, stepping back into the hallway. The door locks from the inside but not the outside. You're free to move around the penthouse, but I'd advise against trying to leave. Vincent and Marcus are stationed in the lobby, and they have very strict instructions, which are to keep you safe. The way he said it made it clear that safe was a flexible term. Madison crossed her arms. What if I need something in the middle of the night? My room is at the end of the hall. Knock if you need anything. And with that, he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him. Madison stood in the center of the room for a long moment, just processing. Then she walked to the door and tested the handle. True to his word, it opened easily from the inside. She peered out into the hallway. Empty. Quiet. The penthouse was so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. She closed the door and locked it, even though she knew it wouldn't really keep anyone out if they wanted in. Then she crossed to the windows. The city stretched out below her, endless and glittering and completely indifferent to her situation. Somewhere down there, in some other hotel room, she was supposed to be sleeping peacefully, preparing for the interview that would change her life. Instead, she was here, trapped in a luxury prison with a man who might be a criminal. Madison pulled out her phone. No messages. No missed calls. It was almost midnight. She should call her mother, let her know she was okay. But what would she say? That she'd accidentally stolen a mobster's suitcase and was now being held in his penthouse? Her mother would have the FBI, the CIA, and probably the National Guard at Dominic's door within the hour. No, she couldn't call. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to explain this in a way that wouldn't cause a complete meltdown. She opened her laptop instead and pulled up her email. The interview confirmation was still there, scheduled for 9 a.m. at the offices of Hartley Creative Group. She'd been so excited when she'd gotten the email. So sure, this was her big break. Now it felt like a dream from another lifetime. Madison closed the laptop and walked to the closet. Inside, just as Dominic had said, were clothes. Beautiful clothes. Dresses and blouses and pants and fabrics that felt like water under her fingers. Sophia Russo clearly had excellent taste and enough money to indulge it. Madison pulled out a silk pajama set in deep navy blue. It felt wrong to wear someone else's clothes, but it felt even more wrong to sleep in her travel outfit. She changed quickly, avoiding her reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. The bathroom was as luxurious as the rest of the room. Marble counters, a rainfall shower that looked big enough for 3 people, and a bathtub that could double as a small swimming pool. The toiletries were all high-end brands Madison recognized from magazine ads, but had never been able to afford. She brushed her teeth with a toothbrush, still in its packaging, and washed her face with a cleanser that probably cost more per ounce than her rent. When she finally climbed into bed, the sheets were as soft as she'd imagined, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dominic's face. The way he'd looked at her in the hotel room, calculating and intense. The way he'd moved around his kitchen, comfortable and confident. The way he'd talked about his mother. That brief flicker of pain he'd tried to hide. She shouldn't be thinking about him like this. He was dangerous. He was keeping her here against her will. He was probably exactly the kind of man those articles had warned about. But he'd also cooked for her, had given her a beautiful room and promised to return her suitcase, had said he wanted to keep her safe. Madison rolled onto her side, staring at the city lights. She'd always been good at reading people. It was part of what made her a decent designer, that ability to understand what clients wanted even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. And when she looked at Dominic Russo, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was afraid of something, a man who was trying very hard to maintain control in a situation that was spiraling. That didn't make what he was doing right, but it made it understandable. And understanding, Madison had learned, was often the first step toward finding a way out. She must have finally dozed off because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and someone was knocking on her door. "Madison!" It was Dominic's voice, muffled through the heavy wood. "Your suitcase is here." Madison sat up, disoriented. For a moment, she'd forgotten where she was. Then it all came rushing back, and her stomach sank. "Just a minute," she called out. She climbed out of bed, finger-combed her hair into something resembling order, and opened the door. Dominic stood in the hallway, already dressed in another perfect suit, this one a deep navy. He looked like he'd been awake for hours. In his hand was her suitcase, the bright pink ribbon still tied to the handle. "Thank God," Madison said, reaching for it. Dominic held it back, just slightly. "I had someone go through it. Make sure there was nothing dangerous inside." "You went through my stuff?" "It was necessary." Madison wanted to argue, but honestly, after she'd gone through his suitcase, she didn't have much moral high ground. "Fine. Can I have it now?" He handed it over. "There's coffee in the kitchen. And breakfast, if you're hungry. I have a call in 20 minutes, but afterward we need to talk." "About what?" "About how long you'll be staying here. And what we're going to do about your interview." Madison's heart jumped. "You know about the interview? I know everything about you, Miss Torres." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "Madison Torres, 26, freelance graphic designer from Chicago. You graduated from the Art Institute with honors. You have a small but loyal client base, and you've been trying to break into larger markets for 3 years. The interview today is with Hartley Creative Group, one of the most prestigious design firms in New York. If you get the job, it would change your life. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with." Dominic checked his watch. 19 minutes now. I'll meet you in the kitchen." He walked away before she could respond, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. Madison stood there, clutching her suitcase, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet again. He knew about the interview, which meant he understood exactly what this situation was costing her. Whether that made him more dangerous or less, she couldn't quite decide. She dragged her suitcase into the room and quickly changed into real clothes, jeans and a sweater, Nothing fancy. But at least they were hers. She brushed her hair, applied minimal makeup, and tried to look like a person who had their life together. The face that stared back at her from the mirror told a different story. When she made her way to the kitchen, she found a full breakfast spread laid out on the counter. Fresh fruit, pastries, yogurt, and a coffee maker that looked like it required a degree to operate. Dominic was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear his voice coming from somewhere deeper in the penthouse, speaking in rapid Italian. Madison poured herself coffee, black because she couldn't figure out where he kept the milk, and nibbled on a croissant that tasted like it had been flown in from Paris that morning. She was on her second cup of coffee when Dominic reappeared. His expression was tense. "There's been a development," he said without preamble. "What kind of development?" "The merger I mentioned. Someone leaked information about it. Not the full details, but enough to cause problems." Madison's stomach dropped. "And you think it was me?" "I know it wasn't you. You haven't had access to a computer or phone without supervision since you arrived. But someone else grabbed a suitcase at the airport." "Your suitcase." Madison set down her coffee cup slowly. "You think someone took mine on purpose?" Dominic pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was surveillance footage from the airport, grainy but clear enough. A man in a dark coat was lifting Madison's pink-ribboned suitcase off the baggage carousel. "This was taken approximately 5 minutes after you left with mine," Dominic said. He knew exactly what he was looking for. But how would he know my suitcase was there? How would he even know about the mix-up? Dominic's jaw tightened. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. But until I do, you're in more danger than I initially thought." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dominic said, meeting her eyes, "that whoever took your suitcase now knows you have mine. And if they're willing to leak information about the merger, they won't hesitate to come after you to get it back." Madison felt the blood drain from her face. "Come after me? You mean like actually try to hurt me?" Dominic set his phone down on the counter. "The reality of the situation seems to be catching up with you. This isn't a joke, Miss Torres. The people I'm dealing with don't make idle threats. They see problems, and they eliminate them. And right now, whether you like it or not, you're a problem." "I didn't ask for any of this," Madison said, her voice rising. "I grabbed the wrong bag. That's it. That's all I did. And yet here we are." Dominic moved to the coffee maker and poured himself a cup with practiced ease. The unfortunate truth is that intention doesn't matter. Only consequence. And the consequence is that you've been pulled into something much larger than a simple baggage mix-up. Madison's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. "So what do? We figure out who took your suitcase and why." Dominic took a sip of his coffee. "I have people working on it. But it would help if you could tell me everything you remember from the airport. Every detail, no matter how small." Madison closed her eyes, trying to think past the panic that was threatening to overwhelm her. "I got off the plane around 6:30. The flight was delayed, so I was frustrated. I just wanted to get my bag and leave. I waited at Carousel 7 for maybe 20 minutes. There were a lot of people. Families, business travelers, college kids. I wasn't really paying attention to anyone specific. Keep going. When I saw what I thought was my suitcase, I grabbed it and left. I didn't notice it was the wrong one until I was already outside." Madison opened her eyes. "That's it. I didn't see anyone following me or acting suspicious. No one asked about my bag or tried to talk to me." Dominic was watching her intently. "What about before the airport? On the plane? At your departure city? Did anyone seem interested in you?" Madison thought back. "No. I sat next to a woman who slept the entire flight. The guy across the aisle was reading a Tom Clancy novel. No one even made eye contact." Dominic frowned, clearly frustrated. Whoever orchestrated this was professional. They knew which flight you'd be on, what your suitcase looked like, and exactly when to make their move. But how? Madison asked. How could they possibly know any of that? Unless, she trailed off, a horrible thought occurring to her. Unless they were watching you. Not me. You. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Explain. You said the merger is a big deal, that it could shift power in the city. What if your competitors have been tracking you, following your movements? They could have seen you at the airport, seen you check your bag, and when there was a mix-up, someone who looked similar enough to you grabbed mine on purpose, creating confusion and buying them time. It's not a bad theory, Dominic admitted, but it doesn't explain how they knew which suitcase was mine. The bags are identical except for my ribbon. Unless they got to the airline, Madison said, thinking out loud. Bribed someone to give them your baggage information, or hacked the system. These days, everything's online. Airline manifests, passenger lists, baggage tracking. If they knew you were traveling, they could have accessed all of it. Dominic set his coffee down, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely impressed. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. I design interfaces for a living, Madison said. I know how digital systems work, and I know how easy they are to breach if you have the right resources, which your competitors probably do. Probably. Dominic pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. He was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked up. I'm having my team pull the airport security footage and cross-reference it with known associates of my competitors. If your theory is correct, we should be able to identify who took your bag within a few hours. And then what? Then we retrieve it, eliminate the threat, and you can go back to your normal life. He said it so matter-of-factly, like eliminating threats was just another item on his to-do list. Madison's stomach churned. What about my interview? It's at 9. I need to be there. Dominic glanced at his watch. It's 8:15 now. Even if I let you go, which I'm not inclined to do given the current situation, you'd never make it across town in time. So that's it, Madison's voice cracked. I just lose this opportunity? Everything I've worked for, gone because of your stupid suitcase? Dominic's jaw tightened. I understand you're upset. But upset doesn't even begin to cover it, Madison snapped. Do you have any idea what this job means to me? It's not just about money or prestige. It's about proving that I'm more than what everyone back home thinks I am. It's about showing my mother that I didn't waste my degree, that moving to Chicago wasn't a mistake, that I can actually make it on my own. And now, it's gone. Because of you. The silence that followed was heavy. Dominic studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he picked up his phone again. What are you doing? Calling the CEO of Hartley Creative Group. We went to business school together. He owes me a favor. You can't, Madison protested. If you interfere, if you pull strings, then I won't have actually earned it. Everyone will know I only got the job because of you. Would you rather have the job or not have it at all? Dominic's tone was sharp, because those are your only options right now. Pride is a luxury you can't afford. Madison wanted to argue, but he was right. As much as she hated it, he was right. She watched as he put the phone to his ear. The conversation was brief, conducted entirely in that same calm, authoritative tone that seemed to be his default. When he hung up, he looked at Madison. Your interview has been rescheduled for tomorrow morning at the same time. I've explained that you've had a family emergency and needed to delay. They were very understanding. Family emergency, Madison repeated bitterly. Is that what I am now? You're welcome. He said it without irony, as if he genuinely expected her gratitude. Madison wanted to throw something at him again, but she settled for glaring. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Dominic disappeared into what she assumed was his office, leaving her alone in the vast penthouse. Madison explored, partly out of boredom, and partly because she needed to understand her environment if she was going to survive this. The penthouse had 4 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. There was a library filled with books in multiple languages, a home gym that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, and a balcony that wrapped around the entire space. She stood on the balcony for a while, looking down at the city. From up here, everything seemed small. The people on the sidewalks were just dots. The cars were toys. It was easy to feel removed from reality, disconnected from the normal world, where grabbing the wrong suitcase didn't lead to being held captive by a dangerously attractive man with possible mob connections. Dangerously attractive. Where had that thought come from? Madison shook her head, annoyed with herself. Stockholm Syndrome. That's what this was. She was trapped, scared, and her brain was trying to make sense of it by romanticizing her captor. Classic psychological defense mechanism, except Dominic wasn't exactly acting like a captor. He'd given her a beautiful room, fed her, rescheduled her interview. He was treating her more like an inconvenient guest than a prisoner, which somehow made everything more confusing. Around noon, Dominic emerged from his office. "I have a meeting I need to attend in person," he said. "Vincent and Marcus will stay with you. If you need anything, ask them." "Where are you going?" "To discuss the leak." Dominic straightened his tie, checking his reflection in one of the large windows. "I should be back by 3. And I'm supposed to just sit here and wait?" "You're supposed to stay safe," Dominic corrected. "There's food in the kitchen, books in the library, and entertainment systems in most rooms. I'm sure you can find something to occupy yourself for a few hours." With that, he was gone, leaving Madison alone with 2 large men in dark suits who positioned themselves by the elevator like statues. She considered trying to talk to them, maybe build some kind of rapport. But one look at their stone-faced expressions told her it would be pointless. So she did what she always did when she was stressed. She worked. Her laptop was in her room, and she spent the next several hours refining her portfolio, preparing for tomorrow's interview, assuming it actually happened. She worked on case studies, polished her resume, practiced her talking points. It was almost possible to pretend everything was normal. Almost. At some point, Vincent knocked on her door to tell her lunch was ready. Someone had delivered an elaborate spread of sushi, and she ate alone at the dining table, watching the city move below her. When Dominic finally returned at 3:15, he looked tired. His tie was loosened, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Any news?" Madison asked from her position on the couch where she'd been reading one of his books. "Some." He dropped his briefcase by the door. "We identified the man who took your suitcase. His name is Tony Moretti. He works for the Castellano family." Madison's heart sank. "That sounds bad. It's not good. The Castellanos have been trying to undermine my family's business interests for years. If they have your suitcase, they'll use whatever's inside to create problems for you, and by extension, for me." "What's in my suitcase?" Madison asked. "Besides clothes and toiletries?" Dominic looked at her. "That's what I need you to tell me. Is there anything in there that could be used against you? Anything personal, compromising, valuable?" Madison thought about it. "My laptop charger, some sketches, a journal where I sometimes write, but nothing that would be valuable to anyone except me." "Are you sure?" "Positive. It's just my stuff. Normal, boring stuff." Dominic sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Then they don't have what they're looking for, which means they'll come looking for you." The words hung in the air like a threat. Madison set the book down slowly, her hand suddenly cold. "What do you mean they'll come looking for me?" Dominic's expression was grim. "Think about it. They orchestrated an elaborate switch at the airport, assuming your suitcase contained something valuable. When they open it and find nothing but clothes and a journal, they'll realize the valuable contents must still be with you. Or they'll assume you have information about my business dealings from going through my suitcase. Either way, you become a target. Madison's breath caught in her throat. This can't be happening. But it is, Dominic said quietly. Which is why I need you to stay here where I can protect you. For how long? Until we neutralize the threat. Days? Weeks? How long am I supposed to put my life on hold? As long as it takes. Dominic stood, moving to pour himself a drink from the bar cart near the windows. I don't expect you to like this situation, Miss Torres. But I do expect you to be realistic about it. You stumbled into a war you don't understand. The safest place for you right now is by my side. Madison stood as well, anger overriding fear. I'm not some damsel in distress who needs protecting. I can take care of myself. Against organized crime? Against men who've spent their entire lives hurting people? Dominic turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. You're a graphic designer from Chicago. You're smart, resourceful, and clearly capable. But you're not equipped for this, and pretending otherwise will only get you killed. The bluntness of his words hit her like cold water. Madison sank back onto the couch, the fight draining out of her. I just wanted a job. I know. His voice softened slightly. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you get that opportunity. But first, we need to handle the Castellanos. How? Dominic took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. Leave that to me. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Madison bit her lip, frustration building again. She hated feeling helpless, hated being dependent on someone else, especially someone as dangerous and complicated as Dominic Russo. Can I at least call my mom? Madison asked. She's probably worried. I've been ignoring her messages since yesterday. Dominic considered this. You can call her, but keep it brief and don't mention where you are or who you're with. Tell her the hotel had issues and you had to switch locations. Tell her your phone has been acting up, whatever you need to say to keep her from worrying. But no specifics. Madison nodded and pulled out her phone. Her mother answered on the first ring. Madison! Thank God. I've been calling and calling. Why haven't you answered? I'm sorry, Mom. It's been crazy. The hotel had problems with my reservation, and I had to find a new place. My phone's been glitchy. You know how technology is. Her mother's voice was tight with concern. Are you okay? Did the interview go well? It got rescheduled to tomorrow, Madison said, hating how easily the lie came. But I'm fine. Everything's fine. You don't sound fine. You sound stressed. I'm just nervous about tomorrow. That's all. There was a pause. Madison could practically hear her mother's internal debate about whether to press further. Promise me you'll call as soon as the interview is done. I promise. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Be safe. Madison ended the call and set her phone down, blinking back unexpected tears. Dominic was watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy. You're close with your mother. She raised me by herself, Madison said. My dad left when I was 3. She worked 2 jobs to put me through school. Everything I've accomplished, it's because of her. And now I'm lying to her. Sometimes lies are kindness, Dominic said, especially when the truth would only cause pain. That's a convenient philosophy for someone in your line of work. Perhaps. But that doesn't make it wrong. They fell into silence. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city was transforming into its nighttime self, all glittering lights and dark shadows. Do you ever regret it? Madison asked suddenly. What you do? Your life? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When I was younger, I thought I could be something different. I went to business school, studied finance, imagined building something legitimate, something my mother would have been proud of. But family has a way of pulling you back. My father died when I was 23, and suddenly I was responsible for everything. The businesses, legitimate and otherwise, the employees who depended on us, the territories we controlled. I didn't choose this life, Miss Torres. It chose me. You could have walked away and let everything my father built crumble, let dozens of families lose their livelihoods, let our enemies carve up our territory and destroy our name. Dominic shook his head. That's not who I am. So you sacrificed your dreams for duty. Some would call that noble. Others would call it tragic. What would you call it? Necessary, Dominic said. That's all that matters. Madison studied him in the fading light. He looked tired, older somehow than his actual age, which she guessed was early 30s. There was a weight to him, a heaviness that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. You didn't have to tell me any of that, she said softly. No, Dominic agreed. I didn't. The vulnerability of the moment hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Then Dominic's phone buzzed, shattering it. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. What is it? There's been a development. Dominic's jaw tightened. Tony Moretti was found dead an hour ago, shot 3 times in a parking garage in Queens. Madison's stomach lurched. Dead? The Castellanos don't tolerate failure. He switched the bags and came back with nothing valuable. That made him a liability. So, they just killed him? Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. That's how this world works. Dominic set his phone down. Actions have consequences. Always. Madison felt sick. A man was dead because of a suitcase mix-up. Because she'd been careless at the airport. Someone had lost their life. This isn't your fault, Dominic said, reading her expression. Don't take that burden on yourself. Moretti knew the risks of his profession. How can you be so calm about this? Because falling apart won't change anything. Dominic moved toward her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. I've seen too much death to let it paralyze me. That doesn't mean I don't feel it. It just means I can't afford to show it. Madison searched his face, looking for cracks in the armor he wore. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, she saw something raw in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or exhaustion. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold control. You should rest, Dominic said, stepping back. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. My interview? Right. I'll have Vincent drive you. Marcus and I will follow in a separate car at a distance. If anything seems wrong, if you feel unsafe at any point, you call me immediately. You're going to be there? Watching me. Protecting you, Dominic corrected. There's a difference. Madison wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. She stood, gathering her phone and the book she'd been reading. Dominic watched her move toward the hallway, then called out. Miss Torres. She turned. Yes? You'll do well tomorrow. You're talented and you're smart. Don't let this situation make you doubt yourself. The unexpected encouragement caught her off guard. Thank you, she managed. Dominic nodded once, then turned back to the windows, his silhouette dark against the glowing city. Madison walked to her room, closed the door, and finally let herself fall apart. She cried quietly into one of the expensive pillows, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. A man was dead. She was trapped. Her carefully planned future had derailed completely. And somehow, impossibly, she was starting to understand Dominic Russo. Not forgive him, not agree with his choices, but understand the weight he carried, the impossible decisions he had to make. When the tears finally stopped, Madison washed her face and climbed into bed. Sleep came easier than she expected, probably because she was emotionally exhausted. She dreamed of airports and suitcases and dark eyes that saw too much. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and there was a soft knock on her door. Madison opened it to find Vincent standing in the hallway, his expression as impassive as ever. "Mr. Russo says you have 1 hour before we need to leave for your interview. There's breakfast waiting in the kitchen." "Thank you," Madison said, still groggy. Vincent nodded and disappeared. Madison showered quickly, using the luxury products that no longer felt quite so foreign. She dressed in the outfit she'd planned for the interview, a tailored blazer and pants that made her look professional and confident. She applied makeup with a steady hand, practicing her smile in the mirror. "You can do this," she told herself. "Forget everything else. Just focus on the interview." In the kitchen, she found coffee and pastries again, along with a note written in Dominic's bold handwriting. "Good luck. You won't need it." Something warm bloomed in her chest before she could stop it. Madison folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, then forced herself to eat even though her stomach was churning with nerves. At exactly 8 o'clock, Vincent appeared. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." The drive to Hartley Creative Group's offices took 40 minutes in morning traffic. Madison sat in the back of the SUV, running through her talking points one more time. She didn't see the second car following them, but she knew it was there. Knew Dominic was watching. The building was impressive, all glass and steel in a trendy neighborhood full of art galleries and boutique coffee shops. Vincent walked her to the entrance. "Mr. Russo will be nearby. Remember, if anything feels wrong, call." Madison nodded, too nervous to speak. Then she pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the lobby. Showtime. The lobby of Hartley Creative Group was exactly what Madison had imagined. Exposed brick walls covered in framed design work, sleek modern furniture in shades of gray and white, and a receptionist with a geometric haircut who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Madison Torres for David Hartley," Madison said, proud that her voice didn't shake. The receptionist smiled. "He's expecting you. 9th floor, Suite 902. Madison rode the elevator up, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Everything she'd worked for came down to the next hour. She couldn't let Dominic, or suitcases, or dead men in parking garages distract her. The elevator doors opened onto a space that was somehow even more impressive than the lobby. Floor-to-ceiling windows, collaborative workspaces buzzing with creative energy. The sound of indie music playing softly in the background. A young man with glasses approached her. "Madison?" "I'm Eric, Mr. Hartley's assistant. Follow me." They wound through the office, passing designers hunched over massive monitors and conference rooms where teams brainstormed around whiteboards. Madison tried to absorb everything, to imagine herself working here, being part of this vibrant, creative community. Eric led her to a corner office, where a man in his 50s sat behind a minimalist desk. He stood when she entered, extending his hand. "David Hartley." "Pleasure to meet you, Madison." Madison shook his hand, noting the firm grip. "Thank you for rescheduling. I appreciate your flexibility." "Family emergencies happen," David said easily, though Dominic mentioned you were dealing with something rather complicated. Madison froze for a fraction of a second. "He did?" "Just that you needed an extra day. Nothing specific." David gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Let's talk about your work." For the next 45 minutes, Madison presented her portfolio, walking through case studies and explaining her design process. David asked smart questions, pushing her to think deeper about her choices. It was exactly the kind of interview she'd hoped for, challenging but respectful. "We're looking for someone who can lead projects from concept through execution," David explained. Someone who understands both the artistic and business sides of design. Your portfolio shows strong technical skills, but I'm more interested in how you think, how you solve problems. Madison leaned forward. Design isn't just about making things look beautiful. It's about communication. Every color choice, every font, every layout decision should serve the goal of conveying a specific message to a specific audience. When I approach a project, I start by understanding the problem we're trying to solve. Only then do I start sketching solutions. David nodded, clearly pleased. Tell me about your most challenging project. Madison thought for a moment, then launched into a story about rebranding a small nonprofit on a shoestring budget. She talked about the constraints she'd faced, the creative solutions she'd developed, the final result that had exceeded everyone's expectations. As she spoke, she felt herself relaxing into the conversation. This was her element. This was where she belonged. They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing everything from design trends to project management philosophies. Madison could feel the interview going well, could sense David's growing interest. Finally, he sat back in his chair. I have to say, I'm impressed. Your work speaks for itself, but what really stands out is your thoughtfulness. Too many designers focus on aesthetics at the expense of strategy. You seem to understand the balance. Thank you, Madison said, trying not to smile too widely. That means a lot coming from you. David glanced at his computer screen. I have 2 other candidates to interview this week, but I'll be honest, you're the front runner. I should have a decision by Friday. If we move forward, when would you be available to start? Madison's heart soared. Immediately. I can relocate within 2 weeks. Excellent. David stood, signaling the end of the interview. Eric will show you out. And Madison, thanks for making the trip. I think you'd be a great fit here. Madison floated out of the office, barely remembering the elevator ride back down or the walk through the lobby. It wasn't until she stepped outside and saw Vincent waiting by the SUV that reality came crashing back. How did it go? Vincent asked, opening the door for her. Really well, Madison said, climbing into the back seat. I think I might actually get the job. Vincent nodded, his expression neutral. Mr. Russo will be pleased. The second SUV pulled up behind them, and Madison watched through the tinted windows as Dominic emerged. He was on his phone, but when he saw her, he ended the call and walked over. Well? He asked, leaning down to look through her open window. I think it went great, Madison said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. David said, I'm the front runner. He'll let me know by Friday. Dominic's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. I told you didn't need luck. Yes, but it still felt good to hear. Madison paused. Thank you for rescheduling. I know I gave you a hard time about it, but I appreciate what you did. Dominic straightened. We should go. I have something to show you. What is it? You'll see. They drove for about 15 minutes, leaving the trendy neighborhood behind and heading toward the waterfront. Madison watched the scenery change, industrial warehouses replacing boutique shops, the glittering water of the Hudson River visible between buildings. Where are we going? Madison asked. To settle some business, Dominic replied. And you're coming with me because I don't trust anyone else to keep you safe right now. The SUVs pulled up in front of a warehouse that looked abandoned. Graffiti covered the walls, and several windows were broken. Madison's earlier excitement drained away, replaced by familiar fear. This doesn't look safe. It's not, Dominic admitted. Which is why you're going to stay in the car with Vincent. I just wanted you nearby in case anything goes wrong. In case what goes wrong? Dominic was already climbing out of the SUV. Marcus, he called. Let's go. Madison watched as Dominic and Marcus disappeared into the warehouse. She turned to Vincent. What's happening in there? A meeting with the Castellanos. Vincent's eyes never left the warehouse entrance. After what happened to Moretti, they reached out to negotiate. Negotiate what? That's above my pay grade. The minutes crawled by. Madison's hands twisted in her lap, her mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. What if there was a shootout? What if Dominic didn't come back out? What if she was left here, trapped in this car with Vincent, not knowing what to do next? Just when she thought she couldn't take the waiting anymore, the warehouse door opened. Dominic emerged, his suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. There was blood on his knuckles. Madison's breath caught. Vincent was out of the car immediately, opening the door for Dominic. "Are you all right, sir?" "Fine." Dominic slid into the back seat next to Madison. "Let's go." The SUV pulled away from the warehouse. Madison stared at Dominic's hands, at the split skin and drying blood. "What happened in there?" "We came to an understanding." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Dominic pulled out his phone, checking messages with his bloodied hands like it was perfectly normal. Madison felt something shift inside her. She'd been trying to see him as misunderstood, as a man trapped by circumstances. But sitting next to him now, seeing evidence of violence on his hands, she was reminded of exactly what he was. "You hurt someone," she said quietly. "I did what was necessary. That's your answer for everything. Necessity." Dominic finally looked at her. "What would you have me say? That I enjoyed it?" "I didn't. That I had a choice. I didn't. The Castellanos needed to understand that threatening you was unacceptable. So yes, I hurt someone, and I'd do it again." Madison turned away, staring out the window. The warehouse district gave way to residential neighborhoods, then to the luxury high-rises of Manhattan. Two different worlds, separated by just a few miles. When they arrived back at the penthouse, Madison went straight to her room without a word. She heard Dominic call after her, but she closed the door and locked it. She needed space, needed time to think. She'd been starting to sympathize with him, to see him as something more than a criminal. But the blood on his hands was a reminder that no matter how kind he was to her, no matter how much he claimed to be protecting her, violence was part of who he was. Madison changed out of her interview clothes and into comfortable sweats. She sat on the bed, staring at her phone. David Hartley's business card was in her purse, along with a folder of materials about the company. If she got this job, she could start over, leave Chicago behind, build a new life in New York. But would the Castellanos let her? Would Dominic? There was a soft knock on her door. "Madison?" Dominic's voice was quiet. "I know you're upset. Can we talk?" "Go away. Please." "I don't want to talk through a door. I don't want to talk at all." The silence stretched. "Then, I'm sorry. For bringing you to the warehouse, for exposing you to that side of things. You deserve to celebrate your interview without being reminded of the darkness." Madison stood and walked to the door, resting her forehead against the wood. "Are they going to leave me alone now? The Castellanos?" "Yes. I made it very clear that you're under my protection. That's what the blood was for, to protect me. Among other things." Madison closed her eyes. "I don't know if I should thank you or hate you for that." "You can do both," Dominic said. "Most people do." Despite everything, Madison felt her lips twitch. She unlocked the door and opened it. Dominic stood in the hallway, and he'd cleaned the blood from his hands and changed into fresh clothes. But she could still see the tension in his shoulders, the weariness in his eyes. "I got the front-runner position," she said. "I know. You were there." "Yes, but I wanted to say it again. It felt good. You should be proud." "I am." Madison leaned against the doorframe. "So what happens now?" "Now we wait," Dominic said, "for David's decision and for the merger to close. Once both those things happen, you'll be free to go." "Free," Madison repeated. The word felt strange, like something from another language. Will I, though? Even if the Castellanos back off, will I ever really be free of this? Of you? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. Probably not. The honesty in his answer shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. Madison wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know whether to be terrified or relieved by that. Both, probably. Dominic's dark eyes held hers. I'm not going to pretend this is simple, Madison. You've seen too much, know too much. But that doesn't mean you're trapped. It just means our lives are connected now. Connected, Madison echoed. That's one way to put it. What would you call it? I don't know yet. She managed a small smile. Ask me again when I'm not being held in your penthouse against my will. Fair enough. Dominic straightened. For what it's worth, you did well today. The interview. You earned that front-runner position all on your own. Thank you. They stood in the doorway, the space between them charged with things neither could name. Then Dominic stepped back. I'll let you rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss next steps. Madison nodded and closed the door. She leaned against it, her mind spinning. Everything had changed in just 2 days. Her carefully planned future had been derailed, then somehow put partially back on track. She'd been terrified, then grateful, then angry, then confused. And through it all, Dominic Russo had been there, dangerous and protective in equal measure. She didn't know what came next, didn't know if she'd get the job or how long she'd have to stay here, or what connected really meant in Dominic's world. But as she climbed into bed and pulled the expensive sheets around her, one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same. And she wasn't sure if that was a tragedy or an opportunity. Outside her window, the city glittered with infinite possibilities. Inside the penthouse, Madison closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreaming of airports and wrong suitcases and the moment everything changed. Because sometimes, the biggest mistakes lead to the most unexpected destinations. And sometimes, being grabbed by fate means being pulled towards something you never knew you needed. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.